I was in Zanesville by that point. I said, are they still having this? Because otherwise I would, instead of coming here, I'd go somewhere else. I mean, to his house or something. He says, no, they're there. Right. That. He mentioned that when I speak what Prabhupada has taught. And that's pretty much a fact. Because otherwise, what was the use of my association with him if I don't give you what I was taught? He asked Jamuna, my god sister, are you teaching people what you were learning from me? And she was kind of, because she wasn't doing it at that point, he said, if you don't, you'll become envious. That's one thing. But the more important thing, if you're not taught what we were taught from Prabhupada, then there's going to be a downhill, and it's already happening. Because Prabhupada gave us very specific instructions, and it wasn't because he liked to hear himself. He wanted, as Naveen Krishna Prabhupada said, us to be trained so we could train others, so that the stability of the movement would remain. So I'm going to start with something right away, because during the kirtan, and this, you pay attention, but all of you pay attention to this. There's 16 syllables in the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. We all agree? So when you insert a syllable, that increases beyond 16. In other words, it's an aberration, a defect. So what you are singing quite often, on some parts you did it right, Krishna, it's not Krishna. And all of you are singing it, Krishna. I want to hear Krishna.
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 Not Krishna, please. Don't add or subtract to the Mahamantra. This was one of Srila Prabhupada's very clear instructions. Don't add syllables, don't add words. For example, one sannyasi, he was the first French sannyasi actually, and he was leading a kirtan in Nouvelle Mayapur, which was the farm community, kind of like New Vrindavan, New Mayapur. Nouvelle means new in French. Prabhupada was upstairs, but he could hear, and the person was going, Bolo Hare Krishna, Bolo Hare, Prabhupada sent his servant down, bring this person. He said, why are you adding? The Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is perfect as it is. Don't add or subtract. So this is really important because we're depending on perfecting our chanting to make spiritual advancement and to be able to help others make spiritual advancement. And if we dilute the medicine, because this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, Prabhupada said, he said it several times, but in one case when I was present, the first time I heard it was in 67, early on. There was one lady that came, and she'd been a friend of mine, so I took her because she was really mixed up. And I brought her to the temple to meet Srila Prabhupada. At that time, we were saying Swamiji. And I was thinking, she's really going to like this, and she'll see for herself how her habits are not good for her. You'll get the idea what her habits were in a minute. So Prabhupada spoke very nicely. He asked, are there any questions? And her hand went right up. I was thinking, oh, this is great. She's got a question. But she didn't have a question. She had something to say. And what she had to say was, because she heard about the 4 rules and regulations. And so she had to say was that, I think that when I have sex, I'm communing with God. I'm getting close to God. And she said it really assertively. Anybody here think like that? This is a way to get to God. But, Prabhupada was not upset. He could understand this person was spiritually not grown, had not grown yet, was a confused person, conditioned soul. So he kindly explained in a very nice way to try to help her understand without putting her down, without making her feel bad. And she still says, no, but when I have sex, I'm with God. She was so like, third time Prabhupada tried to explain, and again she tried to refute. So then Prabhupada looked at her with such compassion, with such care and kindness, and he said, please, I've only brought this one medicine, please take it. And he started a kirtan, and it wasn't like, Hare Krishna, it was like, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this is the Yuga Dharma. This is the medicine we all need. And it's not just limited. Look at this whole huge place. And, you know, we're just in a little corner of this huge place. Behind us is Govardhan Hill. Or at least for us, it's Govardhan Hill. I was thinking to ask everybody, let's go around and do Govardhan Parikrama. But then I said, okay, there's some old people like me. Nonetheless, when you go to the doctor and he gives you a prescription, like just a couple days ago, I had to go to ER and I got a prescription. And it's one of these steroid things, so you have to take it just like they say it or else, you know. If I don't take it like it's supposed to, not only will it not work, it could also cause some problems. So in the same way, when we're taking the medicine of the Yuga Dharma, we want to take it very carefully, very thoughtfully, very attentively, so that we get the best benefit. And all those around and near will also be properly benefited. Like here, we may not be seeing so many people, but there's so many living entities. Each and every little blade of grass is a living entity, the trees and the whole thing, you know. Everybody's getting a benefit according to their ability. So I'm just requesting you all to take this very seriously and very attentively when the kirtan goes on. Srila Prabhupada, as I mentioned, he would stop kirtans to correct. Not because he had some ego, not at all. He was wanting us to get the best benefit, and in order to do that, we had to do it the right way. You know? So that is my humble request. And because you're a wonderful kirtan leader, I'm requesting you to be very attentive so that you can lead everybody in the best way, give out the medicine in the best way. A couple other things I've mentioned before, and hopefully it's getting caught on here, is the Jai Guru Dev thing. When you are with your godbrothers or godsisters, Jai Guru Dev, fine, because you know who's who. When it's Srila Prabhupada's Guru Puja, or when it's in a kirtan in the temple, or in a public space, Jai Guru Dev is not appropriate. Because when you say Jai Guru Dev, it's for your Guru. That's who you're addressing. So, for example, Srila Prabhupada is not your Guru. But you can, that's why we're saying Jai Srila Prabhupada. The Jai Guru Dev thing, I think just recently had the Guru Purnima, was it not? So even that is something that is originally from the Mayavads. You understand Mayavadi, everybody here? Get what that means, you know? So originally that was a Mayavadi type of presentation. And Srila Prabhupada explained, and there's no name in there's no name because everybody in the Mayavad is all as one, or you might be God, I might be, you know, so it's not our line. So we can, you know, hold hands, but we don't actually properly observe it. How do we observe the Guru Purnima? We don't. We observe it by honoring our gurus. Guru Puja. Srila Prabhupada's Guru Puja, or sometimes your own gurus, there's Guru Puja. That's how we observe. You know, so it's good to know these things, because as the movement expands and there's less and less Prabhupada disciples to give guidance, all kinds of things can kind of enter in, and to quote Prabhupada, the original thing will be lost. The original message of Lord Chaitanya will be lost because we're inserting things. So we have to be really careful about that, you know. So I was wondering if, and that's just a couple things. There's so many things, like, you know. But these things are quite public, so it's important that we, you know, present ourselves publicly in an appropriate manner. I was wondering if anybody had any questions about any situation. Okay?
Can I ask about recording of Govindam Adi Purusham Tamham Bhajami? You were
So he's asking about the recording of the Govindam prayers. Yeah. What was the question?
so the question is actually, would you share your feelings when it was going on? And Prabhupada said that this is a ISKCON signature, and
Yeah.
it has changed many lives. At least I know few.
Yeah. Well, it was quite interesting because when we went to the UK, it was mentioned how I was one of a group of 6 adults and my little baby. Our plan, nowadays you have strategic planning, right? You all know strategic planning. In those days, we didn't have that kind of idea. But we did have a plan, and our plan was to meet the Beatles. Does anybody here not know who the Beatles are? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised because it's like so long ago. Okay, you all know who the Beatles are? Okay, good. Some of you are laughing. I always find it kind of amusing. It was like, wow, I mean, that was so long ago, like 55 years ago, people know. Anyways, our plan was like to meet the Beatles. Why? Do you think we were infatuated with the Beatles? Not at all. We were infatuated with the idea of helping Srila Prabhupada spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. Now, it says in Gita, I think you know this little verse, that what the great man does, the common man will follow. So the idea was, if we meet the Beatles, who were at that time so famous all over the world. One time, John Lennon, he was one of the Beatles. We actually lived at his place in London before we had our own temple. So he said, and it shocked a lot of people because they couldn't understand what he would. He goes, we're more famous than Jesus. But he wasn't being a braggart. It was just that they would go to a stadium, 10,000 seats. The seats would be filled up. Now, if a Christian preacher came, you think they're going to fill up a 10,000 seat stadium? Not likely. So he was just making a comment in context. But of course people freaked out like, oh my God, John Lennon said they're more famous. But with that in mind, that they were so famous, let's infect them with Krishna consciousness. Let's get the Beatles to chant Hare Krishna, because if the Beatles chant Hare Krishna, the whole world will hear and the whole world will chant. Now that was a pretty ambitious plan for a bunch of nobodies from the Haight-Ashbury. Just some, a few minutes ago we were hippies and now we're like devotees, sort of, trying to be devotees. We didn't have the books, they weren't printed yet, but we had firm faith and conviction in Srila Prabhupada and the message of Lord Chaitanya that he brought to us. Even though we might not have been even anywhere near being realized, what to speak of fully realized, we had that faith and conviction. And we wanted to be part of a spiritual revolution. Not with guns and bombs, but with the holy name. So we didn't have any money. We went over on a one-way ticket. And because to get into England, you had to show you had financial means. Like now you got credit cards, even I have credit cards, But we didn't have those times. I don't even know if they had credit cards in the 60s like that. Maybe they were just starting out, but we certainly didn't have them. You know, what to speak, these weren't around, you know. Um, so we had to show that we had some economic support just to get into the country. So Shamasunder and Prabhupada made a plan. And the plan was from his BBT money. Now, for the BBT, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, if you have any idea at all how important book distribution was to Srila Prabhupada, and to distribute the books, we had to print them. So that's what the BBT did, and it was just starting out. He loaned us $1,500. He trusted us to take this money, and we would show it when we came in and then send it back. Now, since there was 3 couples, we went in 2 at a time. We landed in a place called Hoek van Holland, and Hoek van Holland was in Holland, and there's a ferry. Now there's a channel, but there was it goes under the ocean, but at the time there was a ferry boat. We'd take the ferry over, and we'd land in Victoria Station in London. So myself, Shamsunder, and baby Saraswati went first with the money. We go through the customs, and they're, why are you coming to, because they really didn't want any hippies or moochie people. They didn't want, beggars. Why are you coming to the UK? Well, I had gone to the UK embassy in New York before we flew out. I got all kinds of pamphlets about all the castles, because there's a lot of old castles. And I said, we've come to see the castles of Great Britain. Do you have any money? Yes, we do. And I pulled out the money. Okay, you're in. So then, we had to wait till the next day. It was the Sunday. We sent the money back over to Holland. The next couple came through. Same thing. They had some other reason for coming. Sent the money back. Now we're all in. Then we send the money back to Prabhupada, and it got lost. And you can imagine how Shamsunder was in such anxiety about this. He took personal responsibility. Prabhupada said, it's not your fault. That was a 5th-class bank. Eventually the money was returned. So now we're in the UK. We don't have a zip code. We don't know, we didn't have a place to go to. So we're all in a little bed and breakfast here and there, trying to figure out how we could get together. And Krishna arranged that we met in the one thing, Yuga Dharma, Harinam Sankirtan. We were out on the street right away. And we met a man, Mr. Cole, Indian gentleman, and he had a flat that had just been vacated in, I can't think of the place. It was in a little suburb outside of London. And he said we could stay there for a while. So at least we had a place to land and, develop our plans. And the plan was, every day you'd go into London and do kirtan on the streets and try to think of a way how to meet the Beatles, because they were so famous. Do you think we were the only people in the world trying to meet the Beatles? If you went to their office was called Apple, not like the Apple, not like, this Apple, but like Apple Records. And we would think of all kinds of what we thought were creative, interesting techniques to catch the attention. Like we'd make an apple pie, and we'd put a little sign, Hare Krishna, take it to the Apple office. We got this little plastic, it was like a tourist thing. It was an apple, and you wound it up, it had little legs, and it would walk. We got a little sign on it, Hare Krishna. We opened the door and put it in, and we would leave messages, we would make tapes, nothing, it was like we didn't exist. In the meantime, we're trying our best, and we're just thinking, what's going to happen here, And a friend of ours from San Francisco, who was the manager of another rock and roll band that was not so famous as the Beatles, they were coming over to UK. And when they got there, their band was called Grateful Dead. How many people ever heard of that band? Okay, well, naturally, there's a couple here would know. They were a big deal band in, like, in the Western culture, but they never, I mean, to a certain level, but they got known and are known, but they never made it to the level of the Beatles. So we found out that he had an appointment to meet the Beatles. So that was something. Here's some musicians, and they have. So Shyam Sundar said, "Hey, Rock," that was his name. "Hey, Rock, do you think I could tag along?" Yeah, sure, why not? But when they got to the Beatles' office, thinking, I have an appointment to meet the Beatles. Well, their office was packed with people with appointments to meet the Beatles. So they sit down. Now, Shyam Sundar, shaved head, Sika, he had this blue, really bright blue, like, see that chair back there, that blue chair? It's kind of like that color of a blue Nehru jacket on. And hand in the bead bag. And in those days, we were wearing yellow saris and yellow dhotis if you were married. That's another story. Tell it later. So he's sitting there like that, and everybody else is just looking like they look. So the door opens up, and one of the Beatles looks, and he walks in, and he shuts the door, and he walks right across, so he doesn't look right, he doesn't look left, he walks across the office into another door. Another Beatle goes, and he walks across, doesn't look at anybody, just gets, so the third one walks, everybody's just sitting there holding their breath. And then the last Beatle was George Harrison, and he comes in, and he's walking across, all of a sudden he stops, right in front of Shyam Sundar. He goes, "Where have you been, man? I've been looking for you." And he calls Shyam Sundar and everybody else, including the ones that he didn't have an appointment, the other people, but he's the one that got in. That was Krishna. Now, why would George Harrison be looking for us? Anybody want to know? Because Srila Prabhupada made a record in San Francisco. The name of the label was Happening Records. And the person was very intrigued with the chanting. And to his great credit, he understood Prabhupada's chanting was not really about music. It was something else. And he had Prabhupada leading the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And George Harrison somehow or other got a copy of that record. And in those days, they had these phonographs, and it's going around and around with a needle. He played that record to death. And so he was looking for another one. He wanted to get another copy of that record. And he said, I heard you guys were here, but I just didn't know where to find you. So then they talked, and he goes, "Why don't you come to my place next Friday?" He lived in East Sherwood. It's outside of London a little bit. So suddenly, like all of a sudden, Shyam Sundar comes back, Herne Hill, that's where we were staying, it's called Herne Hill. So he came back, I remember he's coming up the stairs, up the stairs, we lived on the first floor, which in England is like ground floor, first floor. Because I met the Beatles, and we almost fell over, because that's what we were there for, but it was not happening, and, we doubted that it might even happen, but I met the Beatles. And we're invited to dinner at George's on Friday. So that's how it all got rolling. When we went to George's home, we're devotees. And we know that Krishna owns everything. Everything we have belongs to Krishna. Our homes, our cars, our families even. So we weren't at all shy about going into a world-famous rock star's home and starting to rearrange the furniture in the living room to make place to have kirtan. We didn't even have, we just started moving all the furniture so that there was a place to have kirtan. And, we had a couple of new boxes by then, and you can imagine these new boxes, like, oh my God, but for us, there was no awe and reverence. We were not intimidated in the least. We had something to share. We had something to give. We had something to offer to them. Most people, when they met somebody famous with wealth, they would be asking for something. They wanted something, and we just wanted to give them Krishna consciousness. So then the kirtan was going, and myself, Jamuna and Janaki were in the kitchen with Patty, who was the wife at that time. And she had been to India with the Beatles when they were with the Maharishi. So she knew a little cooking. So I remember she made cucumber raita, and we made whatever we made. And they had prasadam. And then George says, let's have another kirtan. Let's go out and back, in like a backyard, and it kind of sloped down, so it looked really nice. And had another kirtan. And after that kirtan, when we came back into his house, which we didn't even put the furniture down, I'm just remembering that, yeah, we arranged all the furniture, but we didn't put it back together. Anyway, after that kirtan, we came in, and he suddenly stops, he goes, let's make a record. Just like that. We didn't have to suggest anything, we did, it was George's idea. Let's make a record. That was better than we could have even imagined. And then suddenly there we were in this recording studio. You can imagine, like, super professional for the time, right? And all the Beatles came, and all their friends. And Jamuna was going around putting tilak on everybody. I was just trying to keep my kid quiet. And we chanted all day. Now, what could be, except for a prasadam break. And we brought enough prasadam to make sure everybody there got something prasadam. And then we continued chanting. And then, theoretically we can chant 24 hours a day. But you do get a little tired, especially if you're not a fully enlightened soul. It was like getting a little bit toward the end. And we were doing, this last take. And I saw this big gong. And there was a gong banger. And right at the end of the kirtan, of the Hare Krishna, and we'd practiced a little bit because it had to be, it's a record, it's got to be within a certain time frame. So then normally you don't need to practice kirtan, Prabhupada himself mentioned this, but for this situation, because we had to be in the time frame, we had kind of practiced a bit. How did we practice? By listening to Prabhupada's kirtans, so that we could understand how he delivered the perfect kirtan. He didn't start out like, he started out, in fact, sometimes there weren't even any instruments at first. And then gradually the hands, and then gradually a kartal, and then the mridungas. And he kept a steady rhythm. He kept a steady rhythm, and he kept it going so that we were hearing the chanting. We weren't getting blasted by the instruments or somebody's voice. We were hearing the kirtan, the words of the Hare Krishna mantra. And then right toward the end, he'd speed it up a little bit, and then that was it. He didn't jai this, jai that, jai everything in the world. Just, that was it. And it was so perfect. So, kirtan ended. I picked up the gong beam, and I whacked that gong. And everybody turned and looked at me like, what have you done? Because, we were recording. This wasn't on the script. And the next day, came in, we're all there, and George comes walking in, he goes, I think we got it. I think we got it. And he plays the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And there at the end of the Hare Krishna mantra is that gong, and everybody's like, including me, like wonderfully surprised. So that was the first recording. And then the second one was the Govindam. And that one had more instrumentation in it. Hari Vilas, for example, had come over from France. He was, what was the country? Anyways, had this kind of little instrument, stringed instrument that was typical of that country. And he had just come from France. He didn't know what was going on. And Jamuna says, we were going out the door. She goes, oh, you want to come with us? We're going to go to meet George and record. It's like, so things were kind of like that. And in the same way, he wasn't thinking, wow, I'm meeting George Harrison. He was thinking, I get to do a service for Swamiji. And I instrument for Swamiji. That was our mood, service, the mood of service. It wasn't the mood of how good we were or weren't. It was the mood of service, and we got that mood from Srila Prabhupada. I had just come across something from Srila Prabhupada. See if I can find it here. I should be able to. So he was asked a question, and the question was, is it offensive to think of Krishna? Well, to think of Krishna's pastimes when you're chanting? That was the question. And here's Prabhupada's answer. I think you should know that it is not offensive. Rather, it is required. One must try for the point when he simply hears Krishna. So the first part, that's simply hearing Krishna, Krishna,
Krishna,
Krishna,
Krishna.
not Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. And when he simply hears Krishna, immediately all of Krishna, his pastimes, his form, his qualities are in our thoughts. So to always be immersed in thoughts of Krishna, this is our process. When we are full in Krishna, then where can there be any chance for Maya in us? So it's our duty to remember Krishna's pastimes. One who cannot remember Krishna, let him always hear Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
It's our duty to remember Krishna's pastimes. One who cannot remember Krishna, let him always hear Hare Krishna. And then, when he's perfected this art of hearing, then he will always remember Krishna. We will always remember Krishna by perfecting the art of hearing. His activities, his qualities, and so on. That was part of a letter to one godbrother, Shivananda, who was in Germany at the time. And then in another letter to Prahladananda, who's now a Swami, he said, generally, it is a process to simply chant and hear. But if Krishna's Leela comes into remembrance, that is very good. It should come automatically, not that you're remembering artificially. So one time on a morning walk, I had that question. What should I think about when I'm chanting? This was very early on. What should I think about? Prabhupada stopped. He said, think, don't think. Simply hear. How important the hearing is. So that is my little message for today, coming from His Divine Grace to all of you. You had your hand up for a question.
Hare Krishna Mataji. It was such an insightful lecture you gave us.
It wasn't a lecture. I was just sharing some experience.
I was engrossed that the questions that I had, I probably forgot that. But one question I definitely want to ask you is that you mentioned about Krishna. When we do a kirtan, not Krishna, it's Krishna. But when I'm chanting, the Mahamantra, I chant like Hare Krishna instead of Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Is it still okay, or I have to chant as Hare Krishna, Krishna,
Krishna, Krishna, you don't add or subtract.
So for that,
The chanting is for Krishna's pleasure. So he wants to hear his name as it is. Just like we have our Bhagavad Gita as it is. Krishna as it is, Srila Prabhupada as he is. All these things are there. You know, just a little practice. And when you're aware of this and you start listening to yourself and then you catch it, and then it's easily corrected.
What's the correct way to say it? They both sound the same.
Yeah, that's the thing with when you get, anyway, it's the hearing. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, not Krishna, not Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, yeah.
Just discussed it's not Krishna, it's Krishna. The same way is like we sing Rama. Is it Ram or Rama?
Rama,
Rama.
Rama. Sometimes we get a little lazy. We go Hare Rama, Hare Rama. It's Rama, Rama. My suggestion is all of you to go to Google and put in Srila Prabhupada vintage kirtan. And you listen to these kirtans by Srila Prabhupada very carefully, and you're going to get it. They're so thoughtful, they're so meditative, and they're so ecstatic because they're connecting with Krishna. Yeah. That is the goal. You listen to Prabhupada's kirtans. He's not a showman. He's a Krishna man.
no, no, I was thinking in Prabhupada's Japa recording, we hear Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
Yeah, you can hear sometimes like that. But we should try as much as possible during the kirtan. I'm focusing on the kirtan right now because Prabhupada made emphasis on that to us.
But in Japa,
In Japa, we should try our best. Yes, it's true what you're saying.
right.
Now, it depends on if you're listening to one of those digital recordings or one of the actual recordings, too. The digitalized ones aren't as clear. I don't know what they do, but there's like an actual recording. And the best one was where you would hear him say, sit properly. Have you heard that one?
I have, yeah.
That's a good one.
Is that on YouTube as well?
Yeah. Anyways, just do your best to hear it, because the more you hear, the better you'll connect.
So I was also thinking, going back in the first part of your talk, I think it'll echo.
But then come over here.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So in the beginning, you were telling, what's the right way to do the kirtan, start beginning and the ending. So I was curious. So we chant Panchatattva.
We chant all this stuff,
mantra.
but listen to Prabhupada's kirtans. That's what I'm telling you.
Right. So
It's okay here and there to put a little, but what's not okay is when you start chanting this one, that one, and the other one.
So
Srila Prabhupada taught us that in the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, all the names of Krishna are contained. So now, like, let's say Jagannath Rath Yatra, we'll be chanting Jagannatha Swami, Nayana Pathagami, Nayana Pathagami, Bhava to me, Jai Jagannath. Okay, it's Rath Yatra, special occasion. But we shouldn't be doing it every single day. Like, I don't want to point fingers, but there's one temple, well, they'll take the whole kirtan away from the main altar, over to Jagannath Kirtan, and start chanting Jai Jagannath, Jai Jagannath. And it's like this. They started doing that in Juhu Temple when Sitaram came. And they thought, we have to have a special kirtan for them. And Prabhupada picked up on that, and he called out, no, that's when he get all the names of Krishna are there in the Mahamantra. Now let's say it's Radha, the appearance of Ramchandra.
Ram Navami.
Ramnami. So guess what? Who taught us how to chant Sitaram, Jai Sitaram, Sitaram, Jai Sitaram, Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram, Jai Sitaram? Well, Srila Prabhupada taught us. But it was for the occasion of Ramnami, not the everyday kirtan. You can say a couple times, Jai Sitaram, Jai Sitaram. The one he definitely did not teach us and endorse is the Radhe, 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 Radhe. I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. No. You can say, what's wrong with the name Radha? There's nothing wrong with Radha's name, but it's not the Yuga Dharma. So occasionally you can say, Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe. When we first went to India and we went to Vrindavan, we were introduced to the Jai Radhe, Jai Radhe. And so Srila Prabhupada, they say Jai Radhe. Yeah, and he's not saying you should, but he said, yes, they say Jai Radhe, but we say Hare Krishna. We're the Hare Krishna movement, not the everything else movement. And that's what we are known for, and we should be known for, not the Kitchery movement, where you throw in this name, that name, and another name, I have a letter from Srila Prabhupada where I asked him some questions about, because this lady came who was a very charismatic lady from India. They were calling her Mataji, and it was the first time we even ever heard that word. And this was in England, so I was like asking, like, is this okay? Like, Radhe Shyam, Radhe Shyam, all this. It's not that there's something wrong with it, but we're followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and we're following our acharyas. And therefore, the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is what we're chanting. So this is the point. We are following our acharyas. And our acharyas are representative of Lord Chaitanya. And this movement is based on the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And things in this world are not getting any better. I don't think anybody can disagree with that. So we need to get the medicine right, so that we take it right and we distribute it properly to have the utmost effect, not offense. We want a spiritual revolution in the hearts of all conditioned souls, including ourselves. So by the time we get our new temple built, it will be vibrating with the holy name in such a way people will just be magnetically drawn. There's something going on over here. I don't know what it is. They used to say that, like they would come to our temple. I don't know what it is, but they would, and then they'd eat prasadam. I don't know what they put in this, but it's really good. We'd get accused of putting drugs in the prasadam. I just couldn't understand that ingredient, that bhakti. Even at that time, whatever we had, we'd put in whatever little bhakti we had. Prasadam is extraordinary. So we've got such a perfect situation. We have the perfect medicine. And we have all the details, how to take it, how to distribute it. By the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. So if we're going to chant Jai Prabhupada, then that means we should also follow his instructions. Otherwise, what's the use of Jai Prabhupada? So we should understand as much as we can. Yeah. And Srila Prabhupada expected everybody who joined this movement to help, in his word, help push on this movement. We're not here for entertainment. This is not just an experience we're having. This is our life and soul. And we want to share it with everyone. So Prabhupada would always say, please help push on this movement. Like you are doing here. I thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Leela, you want to make an announcement about the Festival of Colors? You're more important.